Yeah.
How interesting that a young man
All right, we ready to
would
roll?
say that to you.
Ready to roll? Let's do it.
All right, we're ready to roll.
All right, I am going to open in prayer. Then I'm going to introduce the speaker because the topic today is one I'm not really qualified to speak on. So I'm going to bring somebody up who is. So please pray with me. Lord, we come before you. We ask that you would be present here, that you would inform our hearts and our minds, that you would be with us, that you would be binding us together, Lord. Let this time be something that lifts us up as a body of believers. We ask this in your name, amen.
Amen.
All right, so I am bringing up Jack Rouse, who's going to be speaking on Veterans Day, kind of lessons learned. He's got a lot of really good history and experience, and he's got, his service and his boys and, the whole thing. So I'm going to bring him up. He's going to speak. Please give him your attention. Jack, you have the floor. Let's do it.
Let's do it. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, Veterans Day is a really, really special day for many of us. I've already talked to some of you that also served, and it's particularly important to our family. My mom and dad were both in the Army during World War II. That's where they met. Sherry's father was a bombardier in World War II. I served in Vietnam. Our son Jeff and his wife met while both serving in the Army right during the period of the Iraq invasion. They met in the Army. Sherry and I met under very unusual circumstances the weekend I got home. So we kind of tie together, I'll get into that further, but coincidences sometimes we think are led. On Thanksgiving Day of 2002, Sherry and I got to take our son Jeff to the Orlando airport to fly over to Kuwait to line up with the 7th Cavalry that was going to invade Iraq. That was, as you can imagine, kind of a tough day for us. As a result, they lined up till George W. Bush said go, and off they went. Subsequent to when they actually went, which was in March of 2003, a lot of the reporters around here were looking for local stories that tied into what was going on in the Middle East, and they found us and interviewed us, and I put here a article of the paper March 29th of 2003 called Family Bible Back in Combat. And what it's a story about is during World War II, my mother gave my father this steel-coated New Testament, which is pretty popular during World War II, is symbolic of protecting you from harm. It had a steel cover to it. It might have stopped shrapnel or a BB gun, but it wasn't going to do much good for most things. I think the protection was in the fact it was covering the New Testament. And I carried it all through Vietnam. My mother inscribed to my father, "To Sergeant Jack Riles from somebody who loves him." And when I left, she put to Lieutenant Jack Riles, "Same God, different war, same protection goes with you." And then I inscribed it to Jeff when he left. Basically, family tradition, ball's in your court, take it. And not quite those words, but that was the spirit of it, that this was important to our family. When he got back, he made this up as all Jeff on one side, all me on the other side. He was trying to show how similar our experiences had been, and in a lot of cases they were. Now, with that said, war in general is an insane and a barbaric way to settle differences. But throughout history, we've always had it. So I'm not at all optimistic that we're going to solve that in our lifetime. So then we live with it. I've heard people say, we wouldn't have wars if we just disarm and set the example for the world. I think Hitler taught us that that's probably not a productive path to go. So we continue to live with it. It's arguable in many instances whether we did a good thing or a bad thing. World War II is pretty much a no-brainer. Vietnam, Iraq, the Balkans are all examples of maybe we did the right thing on the information we had at the time, and maybe we didn't. Hindsight's 20/20, which makes it even more difficult, but I believe that whether we make a mistake or not, I do know that at times maybe we did the right thing, but we weren't fully informed on what we needed to be informed on, such as the culture of the area. I learned a lot about the culture of the area when we were over there, and so did Jeff. But I regard it kind of like a family. Our family makes mistakes. We love them, we forgive them, we try to learn from them and move on and don't do it again. When our country says, we need you to do this, it's our family's tradition that, okay, we'll do that. You know, that's what you're asking us to do. 20 years later, it might look like, gee, we could have handled that differently, but that's like anything in life. So we're pretty dedicated to the idea of serving. I'm going to go through, try to give you an idea of what it was like, and I entitle it Vietnam Then and Now, because I was there in 1970, 71. When Jeff got back from Iraq, he said, Dad, when both of us have time, I want to take you back at my expense, and you show me exactly where you served, because now I've served, I want to know where all you served. So in 2008, he and I went by ourselves back, found the old fire base on the Cambodian border, and really had a wonderful time, learned more about the country. Then several years after that, 3 of the other officers I served with, most of our time was spent on a little fire base on the Cambodian border called Firebase Lanyard. There were 4 officers, 110 listed men, and quite an experience. One of our group started hunting us down. One lives in Ohio, one lives in Texas, one lives in New York, and I live in Florida. We started getting together once every year to 18 months, and we've been back to Vietnam together. We went in 2015. We've been to the military academy because one of our group had graduated from the military academy. Last year, I talked to Britt extensively about this. We went to Gettysburg and Antietam and toured the battlefields, and that was a great experience because those were artillery battles and we were artillery. So we had good interaction with the guys that were there. But I'm going to take you back through then and now, basically, and try to give you a little bit of an idea of what it was like. When I got back, people would say, oh, what was it like? Well, you know, it's hard to explain, so I'll do my best. All right, just in case you don't remember, you know, Vietnam shaped like this. You got Cambodia, you got Laos, Thailand over here. So it shares a border extensively with Cambodia, Laos, and to the far north with China. This is a zeroing in on the area that Firebase Lanyard was. It was right here. Now it's labeled Zamat, but it was, you came up from the city of Tay Ninh, and just as you were about to cross the Cambodian border, that's where the firebase was. And in talking to Ed, he was up in the Parrot Speak area, right? Fishhook? Parrot Speak was down there, and Fishhook was up here. Okay, this was called Dog's Head, and I think you can see why. This is the border between Vietnam and Cambodia, and it's just said, okay, you're up in the Dog's Head area. Let's see, I want to go, yeah, I see what we're doing here. All right, this is when I landed in 1970 in Tan Son Nhut Air Base in Saigon. When I landed with Jeff in 2008, that's what it looked like. To me, not a lot of difference. In fact, some of the old Quonset huts were still set up there at Tan Son Nhut, which was really interesting. All right, when I had the pictures developed, when Jeff and I went, he started developing the pictures, and he said he was trying to coordinate them with pictures I take in 1970. He says, Dad, I didn't know you were a ladies' man in 1970. And I said, well, why would you doubt it? And he said, I said, what do you mean? He said, look at picture number 7, whatever it was. This actually was Thanksgiving Day of our year, 1970, and the USO sent out a Bob Hope imitation show. And I wound up having a lot of respect for those people that traveled around. We were Battery C of the 35th Artillery, right on the Cambodian border. Our sister unit, Battery B, was in Khartoum, not too far away, and they were scheduled to go there next. And I happened to be on the radio that day, and they had a young man that was their organizer, told him where to go and all that. He came to me, or I went to him, and I said, I just got a radio information that Charlie unit is under a mortar attack right now. And I thought, oh man, they're going to go back home. And he says, okay, well, why don't we stick around and have lunch with you guys and let me know when the shelling stops so we can go out there. And these were a whole group of young ladies. Yeah, as soon as it stops, we're out there. So I had a great deal of respect for them. But when Jeff said something about it, I said, now, wait a minute, that's not the most important part of that picture. You can't quite see it here, but at the top you see a watchtower, and over here an antenna. Well, I said, now go look at picture number 7 that you and I took. There's the guard tower, there's the antenna, and this is the major part of the fire base, which was now a tapioca field. So walking through that, the guide said, how does this feel? And I said, there's ghosts here. That's just the way I felt, that there were ghosts there. Here again, the guard tower, the antenna, taken in 2008. A lot of similarities. This is what this area looked like in 1970. One big mud hole during the monsoon season. In the dry season, it was so dry that every time we fired, there was so much dust that you went and tried to pick up a pair of underwear for the next day, your hand was all dusty. I mean, it was just too dry or too wet all the time. This is an outhouse. Some trucks. I think that's one of the weapon systems. Ammunition bunker. So we were living in kind of tight quarters with a berm around the outside. The tree line is the Cambodian border. So you could almost, if you had a really good arm, you could almost throw that far. Here again, the guard bunker. Here's, what else we got here? That's ammunition, additional. You see we put a lot of sandbags around the ammunition. We didn't want those cause a secondary. And now, again, this is what it looks like. There's the tree line in 2008, again, the Cambodian border. All right, this was the weapon system we had on Lanyard. It's a 155 self-propelled howitzer. A full battery position had 6 of these. It could fire about 15 miles. And of course, being right on the Cambodian border, a lot of our missions were interdiction along the Ho Chi Minh Trail because we could fire into Cambodia pretty easily. There again, pretty impressive looking machine. Really liked it, but it had a few shortcomings that I'll get into in a minute. Sharing our fire base was a unit of heavy artillery, which was 2 175s and 2 8-inch. This was a 175. The advantage of the 175, instead of firing 15 miles, it could fire about 24 miles. The adventure was they weren't quite as accurate, and it was an adventure as to where that round was going to land. Later on, after Lanyard shut down after about 4 months together, I was sent to a 155 towed unit, which looked like this. Now, it had advantages and disadvantages, and I'll show you shortly. The advantage was you could move by air. A sky crane or even a Chinook could pick it up and move it, which was very handy when you needed to move in a hurry. The disadvantage was it was a World War II weapon where the enemy was always in front of you. So in order to fire behind you, you had to pick up the tail here and rotate the thing all the way around to fire in the other direction. So if they said fire at 125, on the sighting equipment on this, it could be 2 different directions. Depending on whether you're in this 180-degree segment or this 180-degree segment. A fire direction officer's nightmare was to wake up in the morning and find 3 of your guns pointed one way and 3 the other way. You'd real quick go back to the charting board and say, where did those things land? But again, there's one being picked up by a sky hook, and it was easy for rapid movements. There's one of our trucks with a sky crane. Now, this was taken in 1970. I was along a road going, picking up payroll for the group one time. This is a mountain that was in the news a lot. It's called Nui Ba Din, which translated means the Black Virgin. And the interesting thing was we had the U.S. forces had a radio station on top to relay radio messages, and we controlled the entire ground around it and nothing in between. They had a hospital in there. They had ammunition dumps. They had everything you wanted, and there's nothing we could do about it because they're way back in tunnels. Maybe a tactical nuclear weapon could have taken care of it, but that was off the board under rules of engagement. Now, when Jeff and I went, there's the same mountain. You know, the difference is now the road's paved. You know, it's a little more cleared out. Somebody described combat as 98% sheer boredom and 2% total fear and anxiety, and that's probably pretty close to it. So 98% boredom. We had our lighter moments, and you picture combat zones, you don't think there's lighter moments, but there really are. For instance, this is Christmas Eve in 1970, our Fire Direction Center. You see, we got all crazy decorating it up, and there we are, you know, with a Santa Claus blow up and all, and everybody's smiling. Christmas Day was a different story, and I'll get into that later. But Christmas Eve, we were all feeling good. Now, Jeff was only over there during the invasion itself, so it wasn't there a long time, but he also had his lighter moments. I got a regular lunch group, and we used to get together like 4.5 days a week, and I come to lunch one day, and one of my buddies says, "Jack, did you see the USA Today?" And I said, "No." He said, "Well, they got it right up there on the 7th Cavalry, and during their march across the desert, they'd come into one of these desert palaces of the Husseins. This one happened to be one of the sons, Uday. They had these vacation pleasure palaces out in the desert. And the 7th Cavalry came upon it, and there were big walk-in freezers, and there were a bunch of frozen chickens in the walk-in freezers, so the cavalry took some out and cooked them." And I go, "Oh my word, if somebody cooked those chickens, it was Jeff, our son." So that afternoon, he calls me on a satellite phone. It's the only time during the invasion he called me. "Hey, Dad, we're about to go through the Carbala Gap, and everything's fine." I said, "Jeff, did the chickens taste good?" And he says, "What?" I said, "Well, I understand you guys came across a palace in the desert of Uday Hussein's and found some chickens." And I told my buddies, if you guys found chickens, you were the cook. And he turns around, he was in one of the Sheridan assault vehicles, and he says, "Hey guys, my dad wants to know if the chicken tasted good." And they all kind of laughed. "What in the world?" Well, he said, "Dad, I'm going to send you a picture right now." There he is in a bomb crater with a picture of Saddam Hussein, and this is a framework for a cot that they stripped out so they could put the chickens on it. And there he is cooking the chickens. So my point being, there are lighter moments. You know, it's not all total stress and all that. I loved getting to know the people. And I've got some points on that I want to cover too. But as an example, right just outside the fire base, kids love to swim. You know, everybody likes to jump in their pool or community pool or pool at your house. So do kids. Whoa, wrong direction, Jack. So do kids all over. This is a bomb crater filled up with rainwater, and the kids are having a ball. You're just swimming around having a really good time. We all learned that when we went into rear areas of any kind, or if we were on a road march, to carry gum and candy in our pockets, because we attracted kids like crazy. And they're assaulting me here because they know that I have stuff in my pocket. I wound up, this was in downtown Benoit, which is near Saigon. Our interpreter was getting married. And so the captain sent one officer, which wound up being me, there were only 4 of us anyway, and one enlisted man, we sent the first sergeant, to the wedding to represent our unit. So I wound up in downtown Benoit. This was part of the wedding party, and this was the bride herself. I mean, lovely people, you know, and they were going on with their life. They're in a war zone, and they go on with their life. There's reasons for it. We'll get into it too. This was we went out to check out the area one time. This at one time was a French hunting resort. When the French were there, they used the country as a source to get rubber and rice and all that, and frankly didn't do well as far as the people went. But you see back here, there were structures back here, and they're individual rooms. It looks like one of those old-fashioned single-story motel type things. And we came across that. Of course, it's all been shot out and bombed out, but it was a remnant of the French being there. We found some ammunition. This is blown up ammunition. It was funny, we had 50 caliber machine guns, they had 51 caliber machine guns. We had 81 millimeter mortars, they had 82. The reason being, if they found our ammunition or overran a position or something, they could use our ammunition because the millimeter made little or no difference when a round was expanding. whereas theirs were slightly bigger. We couldn't use theirs at all because you couldn't get it in the tube. So when we found it, we'd blow it up. Also, while we were out on this patrol, bumped into these people. These are Montagnards, interesting people. They were from the Champa Empire, which was the very south tip of Vietnam. And in the 1800s, the Vietnamese started migrating south and basically ran them out of their own lands, and they took to the mountains. Montagnard means mountain people. So they went to the mountains, and both sides used them for help at times because they didn't like the Vietnamese. So if you want to go fight the Viet Cong, they'll help you. If you want to go fight the South Vietnamese, they'll help you. But basically, you can see what their living conditions almost like look caveman-like, don't they? And that's about what level it is. I've given this talk many times to schools or churches, and of course, when we were at Holy Trinity, at both the church and the school, I wound up giving this talk. And let's see, the Maxis aren't here. Some of you know my really good friend Gordon Patterson from Holy Trinity. He's professor at FIT. He's a history professor, probably the most brainy, intelligent guy I've ever known, and a progressive liberal, which is quite a ways different than my political philosophy. But he's the one I can talk to because he might say, you know, that's a good idea, I hadn't thought of it. Or I might say, yeah, I missed that part of it. I mean, we can actually discuss it without getting mad at each other. So when I was doing the presentation, I put in a couple slides for his benefit because in 1970, I was over there. And in 1970, he was a graduate student at UCLA participating in anti-war protests. I said, I'm glad I didn't meet you in 1970. I wouldn't have liked you at all, you know. But I came across this bougainvillea bush there and took a sprig of it and put it on my head. So I said, now, Gordon, you see who the real flower child was in 1970. I was the real flower, not you. It was me. On one of the fire bases, we had just a couple hundred yards from us, a South Vietnamese unit of 105 howitzers. 105s were a smaller weapon system. They could fire about 7.5 miles, but it was all South Vietnamese. I got where I really liked their commander, my counterpart, Chui Ha. Chui is second lieutenant. I was Chung Wei, which was first lieutenant, and Dai Wei was captain. And we got along really well, and he becomes part of a story. But every time I think of what happened after we left, I wonder what happened to he and his family, because his wife was pregnant at the time. Great guy, their own country, and I really wonder what happened to him. This is a market area back then. It was interesting to me. They had fresh fish, but they had no means of getting ice. So there'd be one of these baskets somewhere, and the fish are swimming around. They're nice and fresh when they're swimming around, but boy, you better process them pretty quickly because ice was a non-known. This was up near Boot Up. You see the kids smiling, having something to eat. You know, this country had been in war for centuries. You know, the Japanese, the French, the Chinese. We don't know, thankfully, what it's like to grow up in a war zone. And we become numb to some things that years ago would have been taboo. They become numb to a war going on. It's scary, to tell you the truth. So there's a village in 1970. Here's one in 2008. It looks somewhat alike, doesn't it? This is on our way to Saigon, big city now. This is where our fire base was. It's now a military outpost for the South Vietnamese that do nothing but serve as border guards for the road up to Cambodia. They man the little knife gate that opens and closes, and that's all it takes to get into Cambodia. But it was fun looking around, and of course our fire base didn't look anything like that. But we were going along and our guide says, M50 machine gun. I said, no, it's not. He said, yeah, M50 machine gun. I said, no, it's not, because the sighting has concentric circles on it, which was a Russian-made machine gun. There's no way that was ours. Well, Jeff was taking us on this tour. He says, Dad, I noticed that this was sandbags, and this was sandbags on top with grass growing right through it. and you could see the PSP, the perforated steel plating layer that was holding up the sandbags. I said, that was our command post. That was our bunker where our captain stayed. And Jeff says, that makes perfect sense. He said, when the base got overrun long after we left, they would take down your symbol of authority and replace it with theirs. So they would have taken down the American flag and put their machine gun on top. So it all made sense. This was just around the corner from the fire base. Whoop, wrong direction again. Just around the corner. And at first we thought it must be a cemetery, and it was not. We got to nosing around, and they had a young lady guy dressed in a North Vietnamese uniform, which this was in 2015 when my buddies and I, guys I served with, were over there. And we all commented the North Vietnamese uniform in 1970 would have driven us nuts. But this young lady was very personable, approached us, and she explains that it's a monument to all Vietnamese that died during the war, irrespective of what side they fought on. And we thought that was pretty cool. This was a big place, and the actual structures were kind of an S shape, just like the country map of Vietnam is. And she asked us to write in their guest book, like you often get us. And so we wrote this. This is a very respectful and appropriate memorial for all who have fought and died for their country. It has been a very moving experience for my friends and I. Thank you for providing this to help us know and understand the history of this area with friendship and respect for all the people of Vietnam, from all the people of America, and we all signed it. So hopefully that's still in their guest book after all these years later. Now, moving on, this was taken in 1970. Yeah, we know that. Push the right button. Just one of the little thatched roof structures along the side of the road where they were. I think this is when we were heading out to Lanyard. This was a very similar picture taken in 2008. Pretty similar. How do you tell them apart? One's got a satellite dish on it. That was not the 1970 picture. Had a satellite dish on that little thatched roof. This is going through downtown Saigon in 2008. We tried to get through. That's what the traffic looks like. Look at all the motor scooters. My favorite picture of all this is this one. I was in the taxi and took it out the side. The reason I think it's hilarious, Mom and Dad have helmets on, but Junior doesn't. I don't think that's the way we try to do it in this country. I thought, what in the world? Pretty jammed up. In 2008, during a city tour, Jeff and I had a 28-year-old young lady that was amazing, just did a great job. And we were driving along the road, and she said, Saigon different than was in 1970? I said, you bet. I said, it's you could be in Seoul or a lot of other major cities around the world, and it has wonderful hotels, wonderful restaurants. And she says, well, I said, back then we had none of this. I said, the one thing I can't get over that would have driven me nuts in 1970, the medians of the road all look like this. And if you see, you've got a North Vietnamese flag and a communist flag just lining the medians. I said, that would have driven me nuts. That's like putting a red cape in front of a bull. She goes, yeah, we communist country. All communists, they up in Hanoi. She said, down here we have free markets. We can buy and sell and all that. And she said, I used to live in Hanoi. She said, food sucks, no jobs, the apartments are too small, so I moved down here. And I thought, an interesting commentary on what's happened to the country since 1970. She was an absolute delight. This is the Cao Dai Temple in Tay Nan. I took a couple pictures there. It's pretty world famous, just a gorgeous piece. That religion is a combination of Buddhist, Hindu, Muslim, and Christianity. They blend all four religions together, and they're all welcome in that temple, and that's how they worship. During our trip, Jeff and I did a little trip down the Mekong River into the what we'd call the Four Corps area, Ed, which was not a hot spot during 1970, but a very interesting place to visit. This was where we stopped for lunch, and it was all set up by the tourists. Wonderful food. Oh, that's Dan, our guide. This guy was amazing. We liked him so much, I was able to contact him, and he took my Army buddies through when we went back in 2015. And I think back, I was really risky then because I'd been in email contact with him. We were scheduled to land in Saigon Airport at midnight, and he was arranging everything, hotel, food, all that. I landed at midnight, and I thought, what if he's not there? Because I didn't even know what hotel he had registered us in. I didn't know where we were going, what we were expected. But we got off the plane, and in the terminal there he is, waving his hand. I thought, man, am I glad to see you. But we ate way back in the jungle. And one of the things they offered us, which I did not partake, was wine. This is them fermenting wine. Anybody know what kind of wine it is? It's snake wine. These are snakes. So they offered us snake wine, which I very respectfully declined. We visited Cu Chi. Anybody who served over there know what the Cu Chi tunnels were like. Here's what they look like now. That's Jeff. Picture Ho Chi Minh and communist flag and Vietnamese flag down in the ground. Boy, they tunneled under everything. One reason I think we didn't have a lot of fighting in the Mekong area was, here's what it looks like. I don't know how you set an ambush or anything like that. And I don't think artillery would do much good. Too much dispersion of the energy there. This was one of the later fire bases I served on that taught me a good lesson. This was actually my hooch. And you go down under. We were able to move into this after the Corps of Engineers had some time, which was unusual. They dug holes so we could build our hooches. The PSP, the perforated steel plating here, and then you loaded it with sandbags. My bed was actually right about even with here. So any mortar coming in had no risk of hurting me. It could land right on top, the side, and we all had that. The problem was all fire bases are temporary. At the time, the South Vietnamese were over into Cambodia at a town called Krek, getting their butts kicked. I mean, they were really not doing well. They fought for several weeks. And then we got word that they were retreating. The South Vietnamese were retreating. And we were like, man, we got to dig in here. This is the border, right here. They're going to come here and want to take a stand, stay out of our country. Just the opposite. They just kept going. Well, where are you guys going? Oh, we're going home. We've been fighting for 2 weeks. We got to go see our wives. We got to go see how our kids are doing. We don't know what it's like to live in a country that for generations has been at war. And we thought, what in the world? But once you understand the culture, you do the same thing. There's no doubt. So here we had all this beautiful fire base all set up. You can see the berm in the background here. We had to get out of there quick and leave this all behind, just abandon it. So that's where I slept in 1970, and here's where I slept in 2008. There's a slight difference, the hotel we stayed at. Here's what a typical village looked like in 1970, and here's that's downtown Saigon. A little bit different. It is a metropolis. I highly recommend it as a place to visit. Now, lessons learned, and now that I've had 50 plus years to think about it, this is a very important thing to me. I went over there thinking, okay, we got communists and we got freedom-loving people, and all we got to do is go over there and keep the communists away, and the freedom-loving people will love us and welcome us and all that kind of stuff. No. We were out in the villages. Most of the villagers didn't know who their president was or care. They didn't know what the situation was. They were doing what most of us would do, and that is pledge allegiance to whoever had the biggest stick. If the Viet Cong were in charge of that village and had the power, that's who they were going to help because that was in their best interest. If we were in charge of the village, they were American rah-rah cheerleaders. What you do when you live in that situation, all right, come on. what you do when you are in that situation, you've got three things primarily on your mind when you wake up in the morning. Am I safe? We take that for granted. Will I have enough to feed my family today? We take that for granted. And do I have something to look forward to? Because with this going on around you, I better enjoy today because I truly don't know what tomorrow will bring. Don't assume. And what I mean by that is when you hear the news over here, often it's totally factual, and sometimes it's even appropriate for the time, but you don't know the whole story. As an example, I showed you how happy we were on Christmas Eve. Celebrating Christmas, decorating. Christmas Day was publicized over here and over there as a wonderful day for all of us because it was a ceasefire. The two sides had agreed no firing on Christmas Day. Well, and an axiom of being in a combat zone is the rules of engagement are established by the side with the lowest moral values. So the other side didn't fire on us, but they moved all their troops around to different locations. And we knew they were doing it. We just couldn't do anything about it. The result was, for about 3 weeks afterwards, all of our convoys coming up on resupply were ambushed and really cut off our supplies a lot. Now, the two things you can't get along without is water and ammunition. And you get short of either one, you get real scared. So that was not, Christmas ceasefire that year, 1970, was not a good thing for the guys that were in the field. The other is this whole concept of collateral damage. I really believe that our country puts a high premium on not allowing collateral damage to occur. When we do, we try to go after it. Lieutenant Calley's experience of wiping out the village is a perfect example of don't do that. You can't do that. But a tougher would be, you're on a fire base, your biggest threat is mortar attacks, but most of these are very primitive. There'll be just a couple people and they'll throw up their mortars, which take a while to complete their arc. They're moving. You've got the ability to figure out what caliber that mortar round is and the angle it approached you. So you got a pretty good idea where it came from. But by the time you do, they're over there launching more runs. So that was kind of, but when I get to collateral damage, you're under a mortar attack. You start looking around, and along the tree line, there are people running. A couple guys, maybe they're not all guys, whatever. There's two possibilities. One is they're running away from the mortar attack, a very possible scenario for that. The other scenario is they launched the mortars, and that's possible too. Your Christian upbringing and your sense of values say innocent until proven guilty. If I don't know they launched this mortar rounds, you leave them alone. You've got the authority to take them out. The problem is, if they go around to the other side and launch more mortar rounds and 2 of your men are killed, you get to write to their parents and say, your son was killed because I took compassion upon the enemy. You didn't do it intentionally, and oh, by the way, you have a split second to make that decision, and you're 24 years old. So it's tough. So my point being, when you read things in the paper, they're probably factual, but understand you don't know the backstory unless you were there. I think it's an important concept. You can make a difference when you're willing to serve. Now, you notice I said serve. That is a all-inclusive phrase. My buddy Gordon, again, the liberal at Holy Trinity, was very anti-war, which I respect. So he went and filed legally as a conscientious objector, went and signed up for the Civilian Peace Corps, and spent 2 years helping build homes on Indian reservations. To me, that is serving just as legitimate as military service or any other kind. He's adamant, and I fully agree, that we need to reinstitute the draft. And the reason being, everybody should serve some. Now, he doesn't mean military draft. He means service to your country draft, of which he set a very good example. I am very, very in favor of that, because one of the things I learned, and I saw a lot of men make, is you learn it's not about you. You know, if you serve in some capacity that doesn't further your career, it doesn't benefit you, it benefits somebody else, you learn that it's not about you. It's about what you can do for other people. And that's kind of a valuable lesson to learn. And I think more and more young people would benefit them. I saw a lot of my men the same way. A lot of benefit to say, you don't care if he's a liberal, he's a conservative, he's pro-war, he's anti-war, he's green, he's yellow. He came from a very impoverished ghetto family, and he came from a family of 2 physicians. Doesn't matter. Can you do your job, and can you help protect me and the rest of the men? So it's a very big equalizer and teaches you a valuable lesson. Focus on the job. and this was a lesson we learned. Oh, what do you think about what Nixon said, or what do you think about what the U.S. command says? Don't care. We're here to do a job. We'll do it. And our biggest job is to accomplish our mission and provide for the safety of our men. And that's all you have time or should think about. Soldiers are not politicians. There's nobody that cares less about national policy at the time than the foot soldier in the field, because you've only got one job to focus on. Be a lifelong learner. Since then I've learned so much about how important it is to learn about other areas about history. The adage that those that refuse to study history are doomed to repeat its mistakes, and I think that's absolutely true. I learned that the people of Vietnam were a whole lot different than what I envisioned when I went, and Jeff and I have compared notes on this, and he feels the same way. Don't take blessings for granted. That's my favorite lesson that I learned for a lot of reasons. I think I told you my mother and father met in the Army. Jeff and his wife met in the Army, and Sherry and I met the weekend we got back. When I got back, I realized that the reason I was where I was, as opposed to the peasants I've been dealing with, is because I was one, like all of us, were a winner of the baby lottery. The only difference between them and me was where we were born. And I learned to become very, very grateful for that and not take it for granted. It was about a year before I could get into a shower and not be grateful for the hot water. I forgot when I showed the 155 Toad, there was a canvas bag on it. The bottom of the canvas bag had a spigot that would screw up into the bag. And we would take powder canisters, put water in it, empty powder canisters, put it up in the sun somewhere to try to warm the water, pour it into the canvas bag and rotate it, and that was our shower. So when I got home, and all I do is walk in the shower and flip the switch, that was a big, big deal. I've heard several veterans say one of the things they have a hard time getting used to at first is what I guess I'd say family feuds. You know how we all bicker at each other. Why didn't you take the garbage out? And it's like, do you understand what's important? Most of the things we argue about, you think about it, it's not important. We had a phrase over there, don't mean nothing. So-and-so's happening, don't mean nothing. And I think that's important. I've often said that Sherry and I met by divine intervention, and the older I get, the more convinced of that I am. We went to school at the University of Florida the same years. 3 of the girls on our dorm floor married fraternity brothers of mine. We never met. We were both out of Jacksonville, different high schools, never met. The weekend I got home, a buddy of mine says, come to a party, you're back. I said, listen, every girl I ever dated is either married or engaged by now. And I don't know anybody. Said, no, meet me over there. There'll be guys, there's no date. Girls, there's no date. I've got a blind date, just meet me over there. All right. I walk in, can't find him. Where's my friend? He was a teetotaler, raised in Catholic schools, great guy. We played baseball together. He was in the back room. He had, on an empty stomach, he had quickly had 2 drinks, and that was out of character for him, made him really, really sick. So I went back, what can I do for you? What can I do to help? I'm so embarrassed that I can't face the crowd again. Would you take my blind date home? I said, sure, yeah, I'll do that for you. I'm still taking her home. So I don't think, I do believe there was divine intervention. I don't think it was a statistical anomaly or anything like that. Just in case I doubted that. A lot of you people watch Hallmark Channel like I do, particularly. Yeah, I'm a big Hallmark fan. And there's a phrase in there, a God wink moment. And I think that going to that party, I think I was led there. This summer I had another God wink moment, just in case I'd forgotten. I think going to that party, I think I was led there, and I was being told, here's what a blessing looks like, don't blow it. And I do believe that. Well, this summer, the VA is updating records on everybody that was exposed to Agent Orange, and they had to pull my entire file. I had to pull my entire service file, and there was an item in there that I'm sure I knew it was in there. I certainly remember the incident, but I'd kind of forgotten about. It was an after-action report written up at battalion level of our unit, and it reads, Bravo Battery, 2nd Battalion, 12th Artillery, 23rd Group distinguished itself while in contact with an armed enemy force. On 24 June 1971, the officers and men of B Battery were largely responsible for countering a Viet Cong mortar attack and ground probe. As soon as the attack began, the men reacted immediately and manned their positions. The first rounds were on their way in less than 3 minutes. While the gun crews were firing their basic counter mortar targets, the Fire Direction Center worked up new data on other targets. The remaining men manned their defensive positions on the wire in case the enemy attempted to assault the position. Over 100 rounds were fired as the mortar attack and ground probe were stopped. The heroic actions of the men of B Battery were in keeping with the highest traditions of the military and of the United States Army and reflect great credit upon their unit. I remember the incident because I was the commanding officer at the time of the American section. And under the rules of engagement, you could only fire artillery if you had U.S. clearance and Vietnamese clearance, because, as opposed to World War II, friendlies and enemies were all the way around you. And they didn't want you firing on a church picnic, so they checked with Vietnamese officials that kept track of such things. There's one exception under the rules of engagement, and that was if you're in direct contact with the enemy as the ground commander's initials. I happened to be visiting Chui Ha at the time, at the 105 unit, a couple hundred yards away, when the mortar attack started. So I had to borrow a helmet, a flak jacket, and an M16 to get back to my unit because I was the only one authorized to counterattack and signed off on it. That was not the God wink moment. The God wink moment, and Sherry saw it a split second before I did, it happened on 24 June 1971. On 24 June 1973, we were married. And to me, that's not total coincidence either. I said to Sherry, I said, on 24 June of 71, did you wake up in the morning and say, oh my goodness, 2 years from now is our wedding day, and my future husband's having a really bad day. I hope it doesn't mess up our plans. But she assures me she did not think of that in 1971. She says, I wish we'd have known each other at the University of Florida. We'd have had so much fun. I said, nonsense. We wouldn't have liked each other. You had been out on your own teaching, living on your own for several years, and I'd been sleeping with an M16 for a year. So I was different. I'm sure you were different. I think we met when we were supposed to. So that's our story, and I'm sticking to it. We just trying to emphasize and talking with some of you. Veterans Day means a lot to a lot of us. I hope someday we can call it Public Service Day, where people that built houses on Indian reservations are also honored, because I think that is absolutely as worthwhile a means of service is. But I do believe service for everyone. All right? It's 10:15. You got to be dressed in 10 minutes. Please.